Today's witness is Sylvanus. He is over 70, a thin, pale, acid man. The skin of the face very fine and wrinkled, the eyes hooded, many folded. The voice is meticulous, slow, rather high. The impression of frailty is physical only. The strength of mind is apparent immediately. Sylvanus will talk to us of a tetrarch playing fool, his newfound harmony with a procurator. It was often said at court that it was better to be a servant of Herod than a relative of Herod. You would live longer. It's an oversimplification, but not without some truth. I served Herod till he died. Then in the sharing out between the sons, Archelaus, till Rome got rid of him, and then Antipas, until Rome got rid of him about 2 years ago. Antipas, the tetrarch, part ruler, for after great Herod, Rome wanted no more kings, and after Archelaus, even the tetrarchs would have Romans to show them the way it was to be done. Roman governors, procurators. When Antipas was officially made Tetrarch of Galilee, some months after his father died, it was one thing. After 10 years, when Archelaus was sent away, it was another. The governors came, Coponius, Marcus Ambivius, Annius Rufus, during whose time great Augustus died, then Gratus, of whom I was fond, and after him Pontius Pilate, of whom I was not. When Pilate came, Antipas had been a part ruler, a tetrarch, some 30 years. Procurators had been in the country for 20. I knew them all. They were in some ways alike, bred for the job, a sort of regulation book courtesy, but with a certain hardness. Pontius Pilate was the fifth, and the hardest. He took one look at Antipas and saw him for the weak, woman-dominated fool he was. I think they had met in Rome, where Antipas met Herodias, who did the dominating, but neither ever mentioned it to me, and in a limited way they both confided in me. I was an old employee, a sort of family retainer, privy councillor and senior civil servants rolled into one. I didn't mind. It appealed to my sense of humour to be a go-between. Antipas was gone now, in disgrace. But he was no fool. Foolish, yes, and weak, but he was able, and had inherited his father's love of creating fine buildings, even cities. Tiberias he built, and a lot of Sepphoris. I knew him so well, Pilate less well, but the Roman was an enclosed, shut-in, frightening man. He too is gone now. He went before Antipas, also in disgrace. Such different men in every way, certainly in the matter of their private off-duty lives. Pilate was no angel, but compared to the occasional goings-on among the Antipas family and friends, he was ascetic. When Herodias, that dreadful woman, made Antipas kill John the Baptist, she did it at a party, a wild party, at which her stupid daughter, Salome, danced like a whore, and her weakling of a husband had a good man killed so as not to lose face. Pilate was full of contempt. He had met John, as I had, and rather respected that fearless wild man, as I did. Not long after the Baptist was beheaded, we began to hear of another preacher, a man of Galilee, from Nazareth, Jesus, son of Joseph. Over a period of 2 or 3 years he became quite famous. The orthodox and conservative groups didn't like him at all, and finally arrested him, at night. The morning following that night comes often into my thoughts, though it must be nearly 10 years ago. There was a happening that morning that brought together Pilate and Antipas, whom he'd always detested, in a sort of closeness they had never shared. They became almost friends from that morning onwards. Very strange, I remember it well, and the happening, with a particular distaste. It was springtime, Passover time. Antipas and the court were in Jerusalem as usual for Passover. I had come with them from Galilee and seen them in and taken a few days off to come here to my own home. It was Friday, quite early. The sun was only just up. I was asleep. There was a loud knocking on my door. My servant came to me, rather alarmed. It was a 2-soldier escort to take me to Pilate as soon as possible, to do with the matter of the arrested preacher, Jesus. I didn't know he'd been arrested. When we arrived at the praetorium, the forecourt, the parade yard was full of people, hundreds, screaming, shouting, hurling accusation at the man I took to be Jesus up on the steps, who was silent and still. The soldiers went through the mob like a knife through butter, very roughly indeed. Pilate waited for me on the terrace at the top of the steps. He took me into an anteroom. He looked very angry. I assumed, quite rightly, that he had been awakened in much the same way as I had, but even earlier. Also, he was rather a stickler for correct procedures in the midst of political examination, and the mob outside were near to riot. I said so. And being whipped up too, said Pilate. I know the signs. Paid agitators, professional troublemakers, all out of hand. The preacher doesn't matter, there are too many of them anyway. The charges against him are very minor by law, obstruction, unlawful assembly, and so on. I think he's some sort of religious maniac. The temple lot are in a lather about him. Seems he says he's the king of the Jews and the son of their God. Lot of rubbish. But I've just been told that he's from Galilee, which strictly is under the jurisdiction of Antipas. So I'm passing this little lot over to him. Let him handle it. Well, off we went, across town to the palace. Antipas, as usual, had a crowd of guests. Parties at the palace were 3-4-day affairs. Everybody was up, or hasn't yet been to bed. A rubbishy lot. I knew them all looking a bit jaded. For Antipas, Jesus and the yelling crowd and the high priests and lawyers were just the thing the party needed. He'd never met Jesus, so he set him up on a throne. If he's the king of the Jews, he giggled to his guests, let's treat him like a king. He had Jesus dressed in a gorgeous robe, and he and his ridiculous friends danced and pranced and bowed and laughed themselves sick. Then Antipas, full of half-drunk self-importance, asked questions of Jesus, demanded proof and long words. Do me a miracle, he said. Raise somebody the dead for me. I'll kill somebody. You provide the magic. I'll provide the corpse. What would you like, male or female? I can arrange it in a minute, young or old, with a head or without. He roared with laughter and then stopped. John the Baptist had been a relative of Jesus. To all this nonsense, Jesus answered not one word. He sat quiet. Then the palace guard of Antipas had their fun, and the lawyers went on shouting every kind of charge. I watched Antipas. He was very ill at ease. Herodias spoke to him and laughed, and he shouted in her face. Most unusual. I didn't hear what he said. She moved away, very drunk. He pushed his way through the crowd to me. Take the fool back to Pilate, he said. I don't want anything to do with him. He bores me. Get him out of here. Get rid of him immediately. I asked him, because I couldn't resist doing so, and also I had objected to his tone, whether he wanted the robe back. It's a royal garment, I said, with a little mischief, and the preacher says he's a king. It might appear to Pilate that you in some way agree. He started to shout at the top of his voice, half mad, disconnected gibberish. I took the preacher back to Pilate. He was crucified that afternoon. Pilate didn't care one way or the other. He had no regard for human life at all. He had enormous power and great cruelty. To scourge before execution was barbarous, and the preacher was not the first or the last. I do not miss Pilate. Although I do not think that Pilate would ever admit it, that morning he bowed to the mob. The temple lot hinted at trouble if he didn't, and he did as he was told. It was to his interest. It suited his book. As I said, from then on he and Antipas became quite friendly. He probably found that in the matter of weakness he and Antipas had a lot in common.